So, this here is Events and the Regress of Pure Powers, a reply to Taylor by Ashley Coates, University of Witwatersrand, and this is a forthcoming analysis. 1. Taylor's new solution to the regress of pure powers. According to the pure powers view, every property is metaphysically individuated just by its dispositional nature, which consists in its dispositional connections to manifestations and perhaps to stimuli. Wow, I have no idea what the hell is going on in this first one. We've got dispositional connections to manifestations. Are like what are there ghosts we're connecting to? Like what's a manifestation? And stimuli, I have no idea what's going on. That's exciting. Given that these manifestations and stimuli are themselves or are constituted by pure powers, their identity is fixed by their dispositional connections to further manifestations and stimuli, which are themselves pure powers. Okay, so everything is powers, and then somehow the powers, they interact in these sort of manifestations, but it's a manifestation of a power. So there's pure powers. Now I'm starting to get a picture here. Everything's a power. Just as it was in the previous paper, everything comes down to some sort of power, or maybe a humor, and like that humor has power, or it is a power, and then like it manifests in certain ways. And the idea that it manifests in a different way than the pure power itself is, that's something. The apparent consequence is an infinite regress or circularity in the individuation of powers, on which every power is individuated by its relations to further powers. Critics allege that the resulting regress leaves properties with indeterminate identities and consequently is vicious. Okay, so like if you can only describe things in relation to the powers, then, you're always in some sort of way that you're related to powers, and so you're stuck always talking about how you're related to something else, and you don't actually have identities in the world. So it's like if you want to talk about like what am I, what are you, a person, well, how do you talk about that? You talk about, well, what are people in relation to everything else, and then in relation to everything else, and in relation to everything else, and you get circular, and you don't actually have an understanding of what people are because you're just talking in circles eventually. Okay. The standard response is to invoke graph theory to argue that powers can have determinate identities even if every power's identity is fixed by its relation to further powers. This response, though, is highly controversial, and as a result, the regress objection remains influential. Okay, so if you're going to have like a graph, so you can think of yourself as a unique like sort of structure within a map, but like the unique structure doesn't exist anywhere else on the map, but it does exist on the map. And so in some sense, okay, so you've got a graph theory that you might be able to have like determinate relations to all the things around you, but like there is no other thing that has all those edges and spokes or whatever in a graph theory. So nothing has all like the points and edges that you do. And so you can talk about you as having unique properties even though it's in relation to everything else. Okay. Taylor, however, has recently argued that the objection can be avoided by conjoining standard metaphysical accounts of events, specifically Davidsonian or Kimian account, with the independently motivated claim that manifestations and stimuli are events. The apparent result is a response to the regress objection that makes far less controversial assumptions than the graph theoretic response. I argue, though, that this response does not succeed, given either a Kimian or Davidsonian account of events. 2. The partial individuation regress. Taylor primarily develops his proposal by focusing on token powers and Kimian events. He begins with the observation that the manifestations of token powers are plausibly events. To take Taylor's 5 example, the manifestation of a vase being fragile is plausibly the event of that vase breaking. On the Kimian account of events, any event consists of an object, a property, and a time. I wonder if is this Jaegwon Kim? Who is this Kim? Hold on, I want to find out. Kim 1993, chapters 1 and 3. Kim J. Yeah, Supervenience of Mind. Okay. Jaegwon Kim is one of the, he's been like a really good philosopher for a long time. So. I was reading him many years ago when I was a student, and like he's still like relevant now. So yeah, see 1993, and I don't know if he's still around. He might be. So Was he at like brown? I forget. Okay, so the event of the vase's breaking consists of the vase, the property, the breaking, and the time of the breaking. Taylor, 4 to 5, though, points out that a fragile vase could break at different times, and so the time of breaking is not essential to the manifestation of the vase's fragility. On the other hand, the vase's fragility could only manifest in the breaking of that vase. The vase's being fragile, then, is individuated by a manifestation that is jointly constituted by the property of breaking and the particular vase. This result immediately distinguishes the vase's fragility from every token power with a manifestation not involving that vase. As this example illustrates, given the Kimian events, Taylor's central idea is that token powers are distinguished from each other by the objects that are constitutive of their manifestations. This proposal is strengthened if token powers have multiple manifestations or are partially individuated by their stimuli. In both cases, there will be further events that can aid in the individuation of token powers. Okay, so yeah, basically they're discounting the time when things happen, but you still have if you're thinking of think about four-dimensional if you're thinking about the four-dimensional theories of time, like where you, like me, I am tracking a particular line through time space. So it's like that's me and that's the thing. So it's not that I am I can get cut or whatever, I can be injured. And so the fact the vase is fragile, can break, or people can be injured, get bruised, say, it doesn't have to happen at any given time, but it has to be able to happen to that thing that goes through the entire life of that thing. It has to be able to get bruised if you're a human, or be cracked if you're a vase. That's part of the issue of it. But yeah, so this is sort of the but this individuates me because it is me that can be bruised. Other people can be bruised too, but my bruising is not the same as someone else's bruising. Okay. This strategy, though, only works if objects are not constituted by pure powers. Yeah, it has to be an object through space-time. It's not a pure power at that point. For this reason, Taylor 5 thinks that his proposal requires that pure power theorists accept at least two category ontology involving a fundamental category of objects alongside a fundamental category of properties. And we have got back to quiddity here. We've got a fundamental category of objects. What it is a quiddity. Things have quiddities. Wow. See, these old theories, this is what the medievals had to come up with. If you're dealing with a power theory, then you have to be able to individuate objects, and you need to individuate classes of objects. You need a quiddity, and the individuals have hexaity. So this is just amusing to me that we went from last paper, we were talking about humor theory, and now we have gotten to quiddities and hexaities. Quiddities being types of objects, categories of objects. Being a thing is going to be a category of objects, and hexaity is going to be particular things, the property of being a particular individual. So I have a hexaity because I am a particular person, and you have a hexaity because you are particular individuals. We all have this particular individual things, but we are not categories. The category of human, that would be a quiddity, but we don't have that. Well, we fall under that, but as individuals, we have a hexaity, the property of being a unique individual, but we're not categories. So, pulling out the medievals this week. Fun. All right. While Taylor does not spell out in detail how to extend this approach to power types, he says that event types may be composed in Kimian fashion by constituents including object types. So, yeah, the object quiddity. So the idea appears to be that object types in the manifestation of power types play the same individuating role as objects in the manifestations of token powers. Okay, yeah, so it's telling you what sort of things are. Is this hexaity? No, object types, not individuals. So yeah, they're separating out the sorts of things that can be injured, because you need that, the sort of thing a fragility. Fragility applies to objects of a certain type, like vases. Okay. Given Kimian events and event types, then Taylor's proposal is that the manifestation of powers are partly constituted by irreducible objects or object types. Because these objects or object types are individuated independently of powers, they can play a role in individuating powers without generating a regress. Okay, yeah, and so like if you have the object type of a fragile vase, then it has the power of breaking and it individuates that power of being fragile, because it is of that type. This proposal, though, still entails that the manifestations of both token power and power types are partly constituted by powers, and so the identity of any power is partially fixed by its relation to further powers. Taylor is aware of this point and addresses it by distinguishing between two claims. 1. Pure powers' identities are fixed entirely by their relation to other pure powers. And 2, pure power identities are fixed partially by the relation to other pure powers. So, like one of them says entirely and the other one says partially. It's the only difference in these two between 1 and 2 right here. Taylor accepts that while his response to the regress objection blocks 1, it does not block 2. But he thinks that this result that's the partial. Like, so if you say, look, if you give it things an object, then then it's fixed entirely by the relation of pure powers, and you're guaranteeing this by having objects there also, then you're okay. But if they're partially fixed by the relation to other pure powers, then you've got a problem, because then you have to explain how they also relate to pure powers partially. Yeah, so he thinks his result is acceptable because only 1 and not 2 is genuinely problematic. Okay, so if he doesn't think the partial relation matters so much, then it's not so bad. Okay, the idea is that 2 is problematic, he says, amounts to an implausible insistence that relation to other properties must be irrelevant to a property's identity. This idea, Taylor points out, would also rule out a mixed view on which some properties are pure powers and others are categorical. I'm trying to understand what this means. Amounts to an implausible insistence that relations to other properties must be irrelevant to a property's identity. Okay. Yeah, so they're saying, look, you're fixing it to the objects, but then he's trying to, so what he's trying to do is saying, look, if you are doing this partial thing, you're assuming it reduces back to here if you think there's a problem. I don't think that's what the objection is going to be, but like that's what he's saying. If you think that his solution didn't work, you're just begging the question again against him by saying, look, no, you're just talking about pure powers. He said, no, we're talking about objects too. Okay, so that makes some sense. Note, though, that the claim that relations to other properties are relevant to some properties' identities need not lead to a regress. Given the mixed view, for instance, the identity of power might be partially fixed by its relation to some categorical property. Because the categorical property's identity is fixed independently of its relation to other properties, no regress ensues. Yeah, this is what I was saying earlier. If you're talking about like a part of a fragile vase's object being fragile, then the power that it has to smash, like it's potentially smashable, can just relate back to that object, and there's no regress ensuing. On the other hand, the author says, 2 entails that every property's identity is partially fixed by relations to further properties. This claim does lead to an identity regress, as it entails that every property's identity is partially fixed by some other property's identity. Opposition to 2, then, need not depend on a general opposition to any property's identity being partially fixed by relation to some other property, but rather on an opposition to a regress in the partial individuation of properties. And here we got the author pulls out the big guns, basically said, yeah, look, you can do what you're saying, but then if you switch onto the mereology of properties, you're going to just replicate your problem. It's just a revenge of the regress, because instead of saying, all right, every force is related to every other force, we're now saying every property is related to every other property, and you get your regress back. Okay. Opposition to this regress is furthermore supported by the standard motivation for finding the regress of pure powers objectionable. This motivation is based on the idea that a regress or circularity in individuation relations makes it impossible for the relation to fix the identities of their relata. If this idea is right in the case of relations of full individuation, though, then it is unclear why it shouldn't hold also for the relation of partial individuation. The failure of the individuation relations, in turn, is supposed to be problematic because it entails that powers lack determinate identity. This result, however, follows not just from a failure in the full individuation of powers, but also from a failure in their partial individuation, as the latter still means that the identities of powers are not fully determined. Yeah, so you're just replicating the difficulty in a different zone. You can't just say, oh, we're going to rely on objects here because we have a regress problem with powers. We're going to rely on objects. But yeah, but you got the regress problem with the objects too. The deep problem in this stuff is that we've got regress problems. The regress problem was not solved by shifting the category of what you're talking about. It's not how you solve regress problems. So, continuing. So even if Taylor's Kimian response to the regress problem does everything that he hopes, it still allows a regress in the partial individuation of powers. This partial regress, though, appears to be sufficient to motivate critics' concern that a pure powers ontology entails the existence of entities with indeterminate identities. Entities with indeterminate identities. The result is that the response does not seem capable of actually solving the problem. Yeah, I mean, this makes some sense. You can't just say, look, I'm going to switch categories and it's going to make it okay. Very rarely do you get away with doing anything like that in a philosophy, just like switching categories and everything being fine. The problems do not disappear. And, like, you think, oh, like certain areas of philosophy are easier than others. Like, you think, oh, powers is more complicated than identity of properties. No, the problems don't go away in philosophy. That's not how anything is. Like, you can switch yourself over from, like, metaphysics to, like, ethics. And you think, oh, we're going to have different problems here. No, they're just going to, the problems just are, like, three-headed. They're going to come back and they're going to bite you in the butt just the same. It's like all the same stuff. Not all the same stuff, but like it's not so you don't get to solve your problems by switching metaphysics. Usually it's just you inherit different problems. Okay, Kimian events and event types. Even if this difficulty can be adequately addressed, though, there is another reason to think that Taylor's Kimian proposal fails. As I noted above, Taylor extends his strategy for Kimian events to event types by proposing that event types may be partially constituted by object types. This extension allows that event types have components that need not be pure powers and so can, at least partially, individuate power types without generating a regress. I do not think, though, that this extension works. Yeah, so we're talking not about switching over to properties, but we have object types. This was the quiddity I brought up earlier. The immediate difficulty is that the proposal does not fit with the Kimian view of event types, as Kim identifies event types not with complexes, but rather with the properties that partially constitute events. So, for Jago and Kim, the event type that is tokened in a vase's breaking at a time is simply the property breaking. Okay. I think it's Jaguan at least. I hope so. On this account, because event types are properties, the pure powers view entails that they are pure powers. So if the manifestations and stimuli of power types are event types, then every power type is individuated just by further power types. Consequently, joining Kim's account of event types with Taylor's claim that power types are individuated by event types leads directly to the regress problem. Yeah, so if Kim was saying, look, no, the properties, you can't go to these objects or these object types, it just reduces to the properties because that's what Kim says it was. Like they're just the properties. Then you've recreated the exact same argument above. Okay, presumably it is for this reason that Taylor conjoins the Kimian account of events with his own proposal on which event types are complexes that involve object types rather than so this is why we need the object types. It was that because rather than with the Kimian accounts of event types, because the Kimian account reduced to properties. While this move undermines Taylor's claim that his proposal avoids ad hoc commitments about the metaphysics of events, this bullet might be worth biting for an otherwise attractive response to the regress problem. Yeah, I mean, if like you can just say, look, we're not this is like this is one of these like, you know what? So what if I have to just claim the world doesn't look exactly what we thought it was? So what? Maybe it isn't exactly that way. I'm just saying it isn't, and everything gets solved. Let's find out. The question then is how to understand the relevant object types. As Taylor's proposal requires that objects be fundamental rather than reducible to properties, an obvious thought would be to conjoin the proposal with bare particularism or substratum theory. Yeah, because they're object types and not reducible to properties, so you give them a bit more of a thick theory over here. Given substratum theory, though, there are no object types that could do the work that Taylor requires. There is the type or the category object, but this type is far too broad to do the requisite individuating work. That a power type's manifestation involves the type object does little, if anything, to individuate it. Well, this is why I was saying quiddity. You give things the particular property of doing stuff, of being a certain type of category, certain sort of thing. Yeah. Okay, a better candidate for a view, continuing, a better candidate for a view on which objects are fundamental, but there is nonetheless a substantive notion of object type is the Aristotelian substance view of objects. On this account, objects are instances of kinds, so that, for instance, an electron is an instance of the kind electron. Yeah. This approach provides a view on which objects do not reduce to properties and object types. No, do not reduce to properties and object types exist as kinds. It also seems to allow for conception of event types as complexes of kinds and properties, such as the kind, electron, and the property, force exertion, that captures the idea that event types involve object types. Yep, and this is what we're talking about. We're going back to classical theories of powers again, because that's what we're talking about today. And old metaphysics. Like, how do you deal with old metaphysics? Well, you go back to, like, an Aristotelian view where you have kinds, which was like you can give the property of being an object of some sort as a kind. Yeah. Conjoining Taylor's account of the individuation of power types with this approach would further inflate the proposal's commitments. Yeah, I mean, you do have to take on more metaphysics to say these things. It would come not only with a commitment to fundamental objects and a rejection of the Kimian account of event types, but also with a commitment to substantial kinds, which pure powers theorists have generally avoided. Natural kind essentialists, moreover, generally hold that kinds have certain powers essentially. Consequently, invoking kinds to individuate powers appears to lead to further circularity, as the kinds themselves at least partially individuated by powers. The kinds are, sorry, missed a word. The kinds are themselves at least partially individuated by powers. In response, Taylor could deny that kinds have essential powers, but this would be a further substantial ad hoc commitment. Yeah, because, I mean, what are you saying? Does the kind of thing, being a fragile vase, because I was saying this earlier, but it does seem to beg the question because it has the essential power of being fragile built right in, and that does sound kind of ad hoc to say that a vase is fragile because it's a fragile vase, and that's its essential kind. But again, that sounds like an ad hoc claim to say that it is a natural kind to be a fragile vase. So, like, why would that be an essential thing? Fragility of vases. So, yeah, so we've this is kind of amazing that we've had two papers today where we're going back all the way to power theories, and we've got humors, and now we've got quiddities and Aristotelian kinds. Fun day for me in terms of metaphysics. Don't know if everyone else gives a rat's ass about this, but I'm like, yee, humors. All right. Even if the pure power theorists were willing to take on these commitments, though, I do not think the approach can do the work that Taylor needs it to do. The difficulty is that the manifestation types of standard examples of powers, such as flammability or fragility, do not involve specific kinds. While pure powers theorists who adopt a relatively sparse conception of properties may not be worried about these cases, a parallel difficulty arises for archetypal examples of sparse power types, such as charge or gravitational mass. For instance, the manifestation and stimulus of the dispositions that follow from Coulomb's law involve no kinds, but only the properties of force, charge, and distance. Consequently, even allowing that irreducible kinds can feature in these event types, these kinds cannot help to individuate paradigmatic examples of power types. That's an interesting way of arguing this. Because, this is one of the things about electrons, going back to the electrons have a type. And so Coulomb's law, for those who don't know or don't remember off the top, has to do with electron charge. So force, charge, and distance. How much charge on an electron has to do with, like, the electron's force, how, like, the charge on it, like, is a negative charge, and the distance to something else, and then you can, like, calculate some sort of force or whatever. I don't completely remember either, but, like, you can say, look, like, static charge, you can, like, maybe measure that in terms of, like, Coulomb's law, how much electrostatic force there is there. And so they're saying the argument here is that, look, if you're talking about something like that, then there is no object type. You're only talking about forces, like the static charge on something, and there is no object there that you need to talk about. It's a law of nature. Now the question is this law of nature, though? I'm not sure this is a legit example here. Because, like, charge is something, but, like, is it exactly what Coulomb's law has in, like, is Coulomb's law fundamental in ontology? I don't know. You might be able to, in theory. Actually, this is a terrible idea. But, like, the idea that Coulomb's law is a fundamental theory of physics, they might have some other, like, underlying, phenomena that they would say is more fundamental that has to do with the actual particles. And so the idea that, like, there's static charge on something, it's like, yeah, that's true. Like, you go rub, like, your hair with, like, a, piece of cloth, and it's going to get, like, build up a static charge. But, like, you kind of feel like there's, like, more going on there than the static charge. Like, there's something about the hair, the electrons, and, like, the cloth that you just rubbed on your head, and you got the static charge to come off. But, like, yeah, that's a good point, though, is that if you don't know what the objects are that you're making object properties for, and you've got laws like Coulomb's law, then where is that object? It's not so clear. But, like, this is it's like, I feel like there's some wiggle room here, but this is a good example. It does make it harder, because you're like, well, where are the objects that Taylor needs? All right. Author says, I do not see, then, how Taylor's attempt to fix the identities of power types by invoking event types that involve object types can work. Yeah, so if you have, like, the object type of the electron, but, like, you don't need that object type in talking about static charge, then you still have no explanation. Okay, making sense of the proposal requires adopting a set of substantial, seemingly ad hoc metaphysical commitments. Even given these commitments, though, the approach still fails because the manifestations and stimuli of archetypal power types do not involve kinds. Yeah, so, like, this natural law. But again, natural law is a funny thing. Like, if you think Coulomb's law is a law of nature, like, that's a funny thing to, like, you don't find laws of nature. Like, here's a quarter. Like, you see? U.S. quarter. Boom. You don't find, like, you can't go, like, pick up a law of nature like that and show it to people. So they're not exactly the same sort. They're not on the same sort of playing field as, like, a vase or a quarter. Like, these are not objects in the world laws of nature. All right. 4. Davidsonian events. I have argued thus far that Taylor's proposal runs into serious problems when based on a Kimian account of events. I now argue that the proposal fares no better when combined with a Davidsonian account. On the Davidsonian account that Taylor employs, events are ontological primitives individuated by their causal relations to other events. While Taylor does not say in any detail how his proposal would run, given this conception of events, the idea appears to be that Davidson's primitive events would take the place of objects in the Kimian account. So, because a token power's manifestation and stimulus are primitive events, the power would be individuated by its relation to them without producing any regress or circularity in the individuation of powers. Okay, we'll see. This proposal comes with a commitment to the causal criterion for the individuation of events, but probably the most influential objection to this criterion is that it generates a vicious regress or circularity in the individuation of events. The basic problem is that if every event is individuated just by its causal relation to other events, then every event is individuated by its relation to further events. So, invoking the Davidsonian account of events to avoid the regress problem simply trades one series problem with the regress individuation relations for another. Yeah, it's the same thing. If you're as before, you can't trade powers for properties. If you're trading it for events, it's again shifting object does not save your metaphysics. It's just not going to. Moreover, given a standard power theoretic account of causation, conjoining Taylor's proposal with the causal criterion generates a further circularity of individuation relations. Powers theorists generally hold that an event C is the cause of an event E, at least partly in virtue of C's involving a power or set of powers that has E as its manifestation. For instance, striking a vase causes it to break at least partly in virtue of the vase's being fragile. Yeah. Given the causal criterion, though, the breaking of the vase is partly individuated by it being caused by the vase being struck. By the vases being struck, yes. Well, the breaking is individuated by the fact that it broke. So it seems, yeah. So the vases being fragile is involved in determining that the vases being struck causes its breaking, which in turn is involved in determining the identity of the vases breaking. Consequently, the vase's fragility is involved in determining the identity of the vases breaking. Yeah, this is what happened before. So instead of saying, all right, it has the power of being fragile, you're saying, well, the object is fragile. Now you're saying, because that's shifting it to the property of the object. Now you're shifting it to the property of the event where it breaks. But again, shifting between power to object property to event property. Again, shifting ontology here is not solving the problem. Not sort of the thing that can happen. And you recreate the regress problem as the author states here. On Taylor's proposal, though, the identity of the vase's fragility is fixed by its connection to the vase's breaking. The result is a circularity in individuation relations on which the identity of the vase's fragility is at least partly fixed by the vase's breaking, but the identity of the vase's breaking is also at least partly fixed by the vase's fragility. You gotta wonder, is this circularity vicious or is this virtuous? Like, the fact that something breaks shows that it has a power, like that's how it was, but like, again, like, this may be a chicken or the egg. I guess it's always a problem. Maybe some people would just bite the bullet here. I don't know, like, for this sort of circularity. I bet people do. I wonder what the bite the bullet theory is there. Like, chicken or the egg thing. Okay. For the causal criterion, that is. Invoking the causal criterion to avoid the regress of pure powers then still leaves power theorists with serious problems, a circularity or regress in individuation relations. There may be, though, a way to rescue the key idea behind Taylor's appeal to Davidsonian events. After giving up the causal criterion, Davidson combines his primitivist view of events with a spatiotemporal criterion of individuation. Oh, are we getting the worm through time that I was saying, the four-dimensional worm? Maybe it is where we're going. According to this criterion, two events are identical just if they occur in the exact same space and time. Yeah, so like if my hand moving through space is the same in all worlds, like right here, then they're the same thing. Unlike the causal criterion, this criterion does not lead to any obvious circularity in the individuation of events or powers. So this account might fit better with Taylor's argument that Davidson's primitive events provide an independently motivated account of events that allow a pure powers ontology to avoid circular individuation relations. Yeah, but this is again, this has problems. Author says, a well-known concern about the spatiotemporal criterion raised by Davidson himself before adopting it is that it produces highly rough-grained individuation of events. Whatever one thinks of this characteristic of the criterion in general, it leaves the criterion incapable of individuating the manifestations of token powers. A modified version of Davidson's famous counterexample to the spatiotemporal criterion, which is also similar to an example used by Taylor, demonstrates this point. If a metal ball is placed on an inclined heated metal plane, the balls rolling down the plane coincides in space and time with the balls becoming warmer. The spatiotemporal criterion then entails that these two events are identical. For the powers theorist, though, these events are distinct manifestations of distinct powers. The ball's power to heat up when exposed to a heated surface does not have as its manifestation, or as part of its manifestation, the balls rolling down an inclined plane. After all, this power could manifest without the ball rolling. So for the powers theorist, these events must be distinct, as only one of them is the manifestation of the ball's power to heat up when exposed to a heated surface. The consequence is that, because distinct token powers can have distinct manifestations that coincide in space and time, the manifestations of token powers cannot be spatiotemporally individuated events. So whatever one thinks of the rough grain of spatiotemporal criterion, in general it is too rough grain to individuate the manifestation of token powers. Yeah, so I don't know if this is like a clear thing, but like if you think of the entire universe in like instantaneous like time slices, slice. And then you're saying, okay, well, look, there I am in that time slice, and there I am in the next time slice. No. How you are picking out yourself from that time slice, and you're saying, okay, that's like one frame of me on screen. This is the next frame of me on screen. This is the next. The way you're doing that is you're looking at that from causal relations in the world, not from the time slices yourself. And so you have to add more information in. It's just not there on its own. Like if you take frames from like a movie, but you can imagine like an alien looking at it. Alien doesn't know what a human looks like. It just sees like, you know, globs moving around, like colors moving around. It doesn't know what a person looks like. And so that's the thing here. You can't figure out what's going on in the time slices, you know, in frames of a film, unless you have some idea what's going on in the world already, and then you're adding more stuff in. And so you can't just individuate stuff by having a frame of a film without having a further understanding of what's going on here. Okay. Author says, Taylor's proposal then does not work on either Davidsonian approach. While the first approach generates further serious regress or circularity problems with individuation relations, the second is too rough-grained to individuate the manifestations of token powers. Conclusion. I have argued that Taylor's proposal does not succeed given either a Kimian or Davidsonian account of events. The upshot is that the pure powers theorist's best bet in responding to the regress problem remains the standard graph theoretic response. For those who find the objections to this response compelling, the problem continues to provide good grounds to reject a pure powers ontology. Not bad. I mean, this is like I was saying. I was thinking this was a early career researcher. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. They didn't have anything on their Phil Papers page that would lead me to think they've had a long career. This is just like, you know, a nice, tightly argued paper on a topic of limited interest, I guess, to people who care about pure powers. This matters to everyone else. Maybe not. But like, I thought it was nicely argued in the little area. Give someone, you know, just nail down what your arguments are and why the person you're responding to does not, their arguments will not work. Demonstrate competence in talking about some big names. You got to talk about Jaegwon Kim and Donald Davidson. So it's like, yeah. So like, this is the thing. Taco. Interesting. Yeah.